Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Kurt and Lacey.
Hello.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and a comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about losing and how I'm tired of doing these intros. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix. Welcome to Just One More Fix. So I guess we're going to jump right into it. So today we're going to talk about
Losers.
losing.
No, loss.
Oh, sorry. Loss.
So to kind of set this up, in the last episode, we talked about running games with an end in mind and how in some of the games we had played, we had some player-on-player action. Or, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
PvP, player versus player action.
That may have happened, too. I don't know.
Basically, at a certain point, if you've got adversarial play happening, at a certain point you have to make a decision that someone has to win or someone has to lose, or you just have to say, we're not playing this game.
Yeah.
So one of those, is that two things?
Well, there's
Yes,
the player versus player and player versus environment, I
Right.
think, are the two entirely separate.
Yeah, but either way, when that happens, you have to make the decision that either we are going to have conflict resolution, so there'll be a finality, a winner and a loser, or we will just walk away from this game entirely. So what we're going to
I'm not okay with the second one.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So we are on, all three of us, I think, here are all on the side of having loss, what that includes up to and including character death, I suppose. With the one caveat that says it has to matter. It has to add to the drama. It has to add to the story in some way. Because if the death is just sort of doesn't add anything to the story, then what are we really doing it for? Is that fair?
No, that would be fair
Yeah,
to say.
definitely.
It's you've got to have some sort of risk factor to it. And I'll be honest, I have not been as good recently in the last like 4 or 5 years about not player death, because that would be illegal. Character death, and not to mention it's not good for repeat,
Right.
Long-term
Player character
campaigns.
Kind of ends the gaming group.
Yeah, and then you go to jail. No, about character death. And
Okay.
I think just in general, as a GM, it's something you struggle with because you don't always know how people are going to take it, and
Yeah.
you want people to come back and game with
Right,
you again, and
right.
you're kind of afraid of
Well,
that.
I think this is obviously
character offensiveness.
I think we can kind of break this into two components again. How we do this a lot with one shots as one category of it, and then like long-term games. In one shots, do you care if your characters die?
no.
I don't care as long as mine don't die at the beginning.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've got to die well.
I still
They should die
care,
well.
but there's like a spectrum of investiture, you
right,
know.
right,
And
right.
it's,
Because like for one shots, I'm like drive it like a rental baby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Right.
let's wreck it and let the wheels fall off and see where the chips fall.
Yeah.
So, but with long-term games, I'm okay with my characters dying. In fact, I build a lot of my characters with that in mind because I like the heroic tragedy.
Like the drama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want my death to matter. Accepting those parameters, right, as part of our argument, we're going to kind of try and find a way to get players that are not necessarily all the way on board with this to that space, to that headspace, okay? And something that we keep talking about in almost every episode that we've done is about setting expectations. So I think that's the initial thing here is when you set out to run a game is to set your players down and say, hey, this is something that I'm thinking about, and I want you guys to know about it. Not that it's a guarantee you're going to die, but it is a strong possibility. And I
But
think
like, are you saying we need to, before we start every single game, say there's a possibility your character may die? Because it should be a possibility in pretty much every single game.
But there's a lot of tables that play where that isn't a reality.
So just with new
Yeah.
players that are coming into
Well,
your
definitely
group,
with new
setting
players.
that expectation?
Definitely with new players, and also if you have a group where character death has not been I don't know if consistent is the right thing, or if it hasn't been dealt with well. If it so I guess there's a couple different situations. One, you have new players to your table, or just new gamers in general. Two, you've had character death or character loss and failure where it wasn't dealt with well at a player level, right? Because it's okay to have your character be mad that something happened. That's all part of the game. But like I'm talking more about at a player level. Yeah, when it personally, like I'm mad or offended about it. And I guess, is there a third category? Or if you just haven't done it, it just hasn't been part of your game, I guess would be the third category.
Yeah, you haven't necessarily said it's not going to happen. I mean, it might have been implicit in the rules, but how you used them didn't result, and I'm raising my hand because I'm guilty, didn't result in a lot of character death.
Right.
So it hasn't happened. So at this point, as a player, I'm assuming
That it's
kind
not
of
going
it's
to.
not
Right.
going to happen.
So,
Okay.
because I think it's fair to say for me, if you're in my game, I not that I don't pull punches or whatever, but I don't go after you, but I'm not scared to take somebody out. Do you know
But
what I'm saying?
there's certain settings, though, and certain systems where character death is almost expected. I've been just reading, of course, I know I'm way behind, but I've just been reading Legend of the Five Rings,
Mhm.
4th edition. And in there is, of course, because it's a samurai-style-based system, that there's going to be probably ritual suicide at some point.
Yeah.
And that's expected, and that should be in there as part of an expectation.
I think so too, because
Some of the same token, there's systems that it's somewhat implied that there won't be character death. So like your fate system,
yeah, certain systems that
is designed for you to be
gritty.
exceptional.
Yeah, fate is your exceptional, and it's like character death is relatively hard unless you're really going after them. But like settings like L5R or Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, any of those kind of ones,
All flesh.
Well, in that, I mean, especially in
All
the
Flesh,
Call of Cthulhu universe, the character death is a foregone conclusion.
yes.
It should
you
be.
either go crazy, go missing, or die. That's
Yeah.
what's going to happen to you. But I think
on a
we're
long
talking-
enough scale.
Yeah, I think what we're talking in also in those games to incorporate that, but incorporate the ideas and premises out of those games into your other games, because I feel like it can really add risk and add drama to it.
Now, see, there's a difference between, and I think this is important to distinguish between the dice killing someone, because there's always a chance that you're going to roll that snake eyes,
Right.
and them dying for it, because for a heroic reason, there's the jumping into the volcano to save the universe, or just to save your party.
Yeah, or if you just snake eyes.
Or we're having a gunfight and it's snake eyes. I do 2 crits to the head. Guess what? Bob is dead.
Right.
Well, I think even beyond setting up people with the idea that they may die or they may lose, it's important to, at that moment, not, don't stop your game and be like, I think you're probably going to die now. You don't need to have like a kumbaya moment.
No.
But the idea of the succeed or fail with consequences that's involved in some other games, I really like. So when you say, okay, well, you've rolled that critical failure, give them a chance to make some decisions about how their death is going to happen. Like, okay, your character is going to die, so here are your choices. You can die doing something heroic. You can, you can
last
die
action.
so that the other members of your
Right.
party can live. Kind of give them a little bit of license in
Mouse Guard
how
has that. Mouse
their
Guard has it
character is
built
going
into
to
it.
end. And I feel like that can kind of ease the blow
Mhm.
a little bit too.
Okay. So let's I think we should break this down into there's 3 basic kind of players this kind of works for. Okay. There's one is the group of people that are kind of like, like what we've talked about, where we're okay at, I personally enjoy it so long as it's adding to the game and to the setting and to the story. Okay. And this talk isn't really for those players because they're already there, right? Would you guys agree?
Yeah, but when those players are running, they may not understand the headspace of the other 2
Right,
kinds, and they make an actual person feel upset.
Right.
And so this is for them as well.
Right.
So
Okay.
don't tune
Okay.
out.
I agree. No, I don't disagree with that. Like, but specifically for GMs, also it's to how to get really the group that I think we're focusing on is this, because like there's people at both ends of the spectrum that just either are or are never going to get it, right?
And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Like
Right.
I'm okay with it, but fair warning, I'm going to be a little salty when it happens.
Right. So
you
I
know?
think that's the
I've
group
noticed
where
that.
most
Yeah.
people are somewhere in the middle, and I guess they wouldn't necessarily be personally upset if it happened, but they just want to know that it's going to matter, right?
Yeah.
And I think
well, you do form a bit of an attachment with a character that you've been playing for so many games. They've
Mhm.
become almost a real person to you.
right, or like the important characters in a book when they die. We kind of before we
Right,
got on the mic,
yeah.
so we talked about like
you
Ned
gotta
Stark,
close the book
spoiler,
and have a
spoiler
cry.
alert.
you know?
Yeah, spoiler: Ned Stark's head falls off. But, like,
And not by accident, apparently, either.
but that was it mattered. It set the tone of the game. It set the tone of the
rest of the
story, right?
Everyone was going to die.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also raises the stakes in a way, and it makes decisions actually matter. It adds to the
Yeah.
drama of it. So like that middle group, I think, is the people that they kind of get it, but you just have to kind of warn them and let them know. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, well, because if you sat down to play a D&D game, and traditionally, let's say your game master was not one to kill off characters a lot in a fantasy setting, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, James, guess what? Your character's dead. He just got eaten by something sticky. You'd be surprised.
Right.
And everyone else would be like, okay.
Well, there's always the
Even
classic
without
reference.
The gate. Hey guys, this is going to be a high potential for character death in this game.
Right.
And then you kind of know.
Well, there's a classic line, I think, from some module from first edition maybe that said the rocks fall and you die, and that's literally what it said in the box text.
Yes.
And that's a terrible thing. That's not at all what we're advocating or even talking about, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's a horrible thing because that doesn't even matter. It's just like what did we just do? We're also not talking about TPKs because that ends the game. We're trying to find a way to get where there's character death that happens and the game continues on because it has added to the story. It has made the story more well-rounded. Things matter. The scope has gotten bigger. The risks have gotten higher.
Now, one system I like that I think really brought it home for me about how to continue to make that work was Delta Green, where that cell structure is automatically there and there's friendlies that you will then bring in. And like if I do a Legend of the Five Rings game, because now I'm all stoked on it, if I get through all 5 sheets of the character generation process, it'll be one of those things where we will generate families because if and or when someone dies, I don't want you to be out of the game for 45 minutes making a new character because I think that's another consideration. But that aside, I think that sets an expectation. If you've got 2 or 3 characters in reserve,
well, like All Flesh does that in a way. There's a couple of other games that do it. The Song of Ice and Fire talks about a family dynasty and whatnot. But I think those are the easy games where it's already built into it. I feel like, right? I guess what I want to try and focus on is the interpersonal part of it to try and get people on board with it being okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because you're going to have those people. If you've got, 6 people at a table, a GM and 5 players, you're probably going to have one person who does, just statistically, because we've had it, who really don't care for character death. They either didn't see why it should happen or felt it was unjust. I've had that experience at past tables where the setbacks for player characters and the actual person became offended. And dealing with that's it's a real deal,
right? No, yeah, absolutely. Because the idea is to have it make a difference and a positive impact to the story, but not break the group.
Yeah, because if you're having fun, you're doing it right.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so people need to be having fun.
Well, I think the kind of game you're playing to, kind of like we talked about, mattered, but when you have players that are coming into the RPG world assuming that it's all about my character and it's whether I'm winning or losing, as opposed to we're sitting down at this table together to tell a cool story.
So is that
like
something
we're making up a story about the characters that we're playing?
So is that a difference in the actual?
It's a difference in gaming style.
Yeah, but I agree. But like I feel like some games emphasize that more. Not to like harp on the story games versus role playing, traditional D&D style games. So do you see that's that big of a difference in that it already, like if you're already in the headspace to play that story style game, that it's more about that as opposed to how much?
I think that makes it easier, but like the more games that we play and the more indie games that we've played, to me, all of them now are about story. Like if I was just here to play a game to win or lose, then I should be playing a board game.
Right.
Like we are here not just to win or lose. We're here to tell a good story.
Right.
And that is what I love about gaming.
Right. If that's not what you're looking for, then maybe you should just be playing Descent or something, basically. Right.
Right. Yeah,
but it also depends on your table. If you have a table and like you're the game master and all 5 of them absolutely despise character death and they find it personally offensive.
Well, no, obviously.
That's an extreme example. I'm reducing it to absurdity. But, if the majority, you go with your players. Do what most...
Well, yeah, but I want to try and get people over that hump to where when I first started gaming, I was not okay with this. Right. I didn't want my characters to die.
No, I don't think anybody did.
No, when I was, gaming at like 12, 13, 14 years old or whatever, like we were playing games. Now, in those games, we had several characters because our group was small and you had to have, a wizard, a fighter, a thief, and all that kind of jazz. But now as time has gone by, I don't know if it's just because I want more deep stories or my just gaming play has evolved or the way I run games or the games I play have evolved, like the whole game design has evolved, or it's probably a combination of all of those. But how to get people to the place where like Lacey said, it's more story focused, and you're telling great stories, so that
Okay, so now this is what I'm seeing. Now I see a lot of younger players. Okay, what I mean by younger is 14 through 17.
Mhm.
Okay, when they come in at 14 and 15 years old, they are playing a completely different game than we are playing.
Oh yeah, I absolutely understand.
and so I
that.
think some of it is just age.
Right.
And I'm going to say maturity, but where you are in this particular, by the time
In
you
your
hit,
gaming cycle.
in your gaming cycle, by the time, if you're still doing this at age 30, you're at the black belt level of RPG gaming, or at least you probably should be. You know what I mean? You've been doing it for more than a
Well,
decade.
what about players? I don't really know many that started gaming at 30. Do you what I'm saying? Like using it as your benchmark.
Yeah.
If you started gaming it at 30, are you more apt to be okay with some, I don't know, like I think mature themes is the wrong word to use, but like more dramatic,
See, I think it's I think so. I mean, just based on, I've only known a couple of folks who have come into the hobby later.
Mhm.
I think
And-
it probably depends on the person.
I think
Okay.
that's a piece of it too.
Yeah, no, that's probably,
You
yeah.
know? But like I said, I really think giving the person license in exactly how they're dying and giving them some final choices would probably really ease that too. So it's not all of a sudden like, I'm the one that's deciding this is when your character dies and this is how it's happening, but
Okay.
giving you some license in the story at
Right.
that point.
So Mouse Guard does that. If you have a character that dies in one of the conflicts, you get a parting wish kind of a thing to dictate certain specific things about how you
Okay.
die and that kind of stuff. So I think that's a good idea. But let's kind of break this down in a couple different pieces. So in a player versus environment kind of death situation where it's really the GM killing you, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And it's GM as, well, would you classify NPCs as part of the environment too then?
Yes.
In that situation?
Yeah, anything the game master controls is
Okay,
the environment.
okay.
Yeah.
So, are there special considerations that have to be made because the GM kills you? Because that's a different kind of frustration.
Absolutely.
That's a different kind of frustration for a player with GM killing you versus another character killing you.
Okay, I just had a thought. I'm just going to throw it out there right now. So there's a couple different ways for that character to die. The first way is I give you enough rope to hang yourself. I tell you it's a dangerous situation you're going into. You
Right.
say, I'm all about this. I'm going to let it all ride, right? And going into the specific scenario, that there's a good chance for character death. There's just the dice.
When that happens, do you go ahead and stop it and tell them that? Do you have them, like mechanically try and make a roll to know that knowledge that it's a bad idea? How do you work that in without just having a meta moment that says, okay, stop, let me just tell you this
Now,
is
the way
probably
I've
going to end badly for you. You know what I mean? How do you work that into the game?
I have worked now in real life situations, especially with new gamers. Even experienced gamers, I turn to them and say, "You realize that this is a dangerous
Right.
situation," and I leave it at that. And you lower the voice
So
a
you
little
have the
bit.
short
You look
meta
right at
moment.
them and you
Well,
go,
then,
"You
Their thing is like in White Wolf games, there's a common sense merit. It's a 1-point merit that you have for new players,
Right.
and you generally don't make them spend it. But there's a lot of social rules and norms and things in almost every White Wolf setting, and doing things that are outside of those norms can be very detrimental to your character.
Mhm.
So in those situations, like you're talking, is like you can't just walk up and slap down the prince. That's not
Yeah.
acceptable. You're going to die. So when they suggest that, I just break right there, and I'm like, I want you to realize this is the social norm, and what you're doing will result in this. And if they want to move forward, then that's on them. And usually there's some, discussion at the table. Hey, that's not a good idea, whatever.
Yeah.
And they kind of, back up from their original position. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because if you're acting out of a position of ignorance and you die, I think that's a really crappy way for things to happen,
Yeah.
because it's just sort of like, oh, well, I didn't know I was gonna,
Mhm.
I thought I was climbing with ropes, not without. Kind of.
Yeah, well, no, and
But
it's like-
it's important too
yeah.
because it lets you know the frame of mind that your player is in at that point.
Right.
Yeah, it's like and so that's the first way. Okay, the second way that I've seen is that the dice kill you. Okay, you're involved in a gunfight and the bad guys roll, 23 times in a row or whatever your system is, and it turns out to be a headshot
Yeah.
and it does critical damage times 10. And
don't know where I fall on this, because I've had it happen, and it's a story I still tell to this day, where a 16th level fighter got stapled to a tree through the head by a crossbow from a kobold because he rolled 3 20s above board on the table, and was like, well, that crossbow went through your head and then you're stuck to the tree. And granted, in that situation, that game master was very adversarial, but we all enjoyed it because we all knew he was coming at us and we were going at him. so it was okay. It was part of the social contract or whatever.
But if that happens, I honestly think you've got to let that stand, because if you break your own internal consistency that much, then to me that says, well, none of these rules actually matter.
Well, I don't even know that it's that point. I think almost at a point, if you let it stand, if you back up and say those 320s don't count because it doesn't matter for story now, down the road when I kill someone else, do they think it mattered or do they think it not mattered? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, and it's inherent in that system. You make your character, at some point I could critically fail or somebody could critically hit and I could die. You know that out the gate if you've ever played D&D before.
Right.
Yeah, so...
But I think that's more of a game master philosophy question of whether you roll above board and whatever it is stands versus not. I think that's kind of a different discussion.
Yeah, no, but in this case, dice kill is the second method.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that's like a...
That almost has more to do with gaming system preference. So if you're a GM that's okay with that, then cool, that system is for you. If you're a GM that's like, I like to have more license, and when my characters die, then just
almost every system,
rolling, then that's
right. But almost every system has some kind of spectacular success that could happen at the table. But that's, like I said, that's a whole different.
I'm just saying that those. And then the third style was the style you were talking about, player versus player, which is an entirely, I think.
Well, hang on. Let's back up and let's focus on the actual dealing with the GM side of it. Can you think of any examples of how you make someone okay with killing their characters?
So the couple times that I've done it with the kids, and to be perfectly honest, I haven't done it at our table that much. I've done it with the kids. Is I always prefaced it with, if I kill you as a character, I will try and make that death either as comical, meaningful, or as tragic as possible. I mean, I don't want to. I won't tell a big gaming story, but one of the times when I was first introducing new players, it was zombies, and they were in this restaurant, and there was all this stuff going on, and the one character gets grabbed, and they try and save the character, and they all fail, and I turn to the player and I say, "All right, you are about to be dragged through the door, and you're going to die. You get one last thing to do, which is going to be heroic. Or it could be heroic. It could be nothing. What's it going to be?" And she chose this absolutely heroic. You probably couldn't have done it in one action type thing, but I let that stand. And for 4 years they talked about it. Okay.
Well, that's. I don't think
so. That's what I do.
So that's back to giving them the license to decide the specifics of what's going to happen.
And that points to exactly what we were talking about before with it making it matter. And it makes a story, it makes a story enough to where you're talking about a fictional game and you're talking about it 4 years later.
Yeah.
So it's so it mattered. It had an effect and an impact.
So if you're a game
cool that's in the dread system that we ran, where it talks about specifically, so the mechanic for that is a Jenga tower. So when the tower falls, whoever pulled that block as a character dies or leaves the game in some fashion. But it does say if it's at a point in the story, story is always supreme. If it's at a point in the story where it doesn't make sense or there isn't a good way to pull that character out, try to avoid doing it frequently, but you can keep that character in the game until there is a point where it would make sense for their character to have to leave or to to be killed in some fashion, and then that happens so that the player knows, I'm going to die, but we're waiting until it's a better point in the story to introduce that death.
What a great moment to turn to the player and just say, your character is going to die.
Right.
It's not going to die now.
You are marked for death.
You need to decide how this is going to happen, because it's going to happen. And that's awesome.
I think that with the GM aspect of it, where the GM is going to kill you with environment or NPCs, so long as you set the expectation at the outset of the game that everybody understands that that's what it is, then I think that should handle most of that problem.
Yeah.
And if they're not going to be okay with it, then they were probably never going to need to be okay with it in the long run anyway, right?
I think, though, as long as you come to that agreement amongst the players and you get everyone to nod their head, then you're good. And
so if you have somebody that takes things more difficultly, I feel like that word was not quite right, but is it okay to do almost like a soap opera death? Okay, so maybe I critically fail and I get swept away by the river. So now my character is gone. Maybe you give them some extra time to process that, to see, am I going to be okay with this or am I not? And if they're really, really not okay with it, you bring them back a session later.
I don't know. I don't like that. That means that the more you whine, the more you get. I mean, though, at the same time, unless you're going to apply that to everyone, I don't know. I feel it's a little
So
disingenuous.
do you run different games for different players at the table at the same time? Because I would argue that you do, but I don't know that you should make such a large concession.
Well, just gonna say you have to tailor them all the time for people.
'Cause
I do
so
that.
like as
Yeah.
a GM though, when you have a player that does not take these situations well, do you never pull the punches? Do you ever make sure that they don't get in the same kind of player death situation as another player that is okay in that
that's a
situation? Because
sticky wicket.
that's the same thing. It's
Like,
just you're being more genuine with it up front as opposed to keeping it kind of, on the cuff.
Me, I don't, but I'm dead inside. I don't care. If my game is like we've talked, like my game is my game, and if you're cool with it, cool. And if you're not, that's okay too. Like it's not for everybody, but this is the game that I'm gonna run. And if you're cool with that, then come play. If you're not, then maybe this isn't the game for you. But I pretty much stick to that. There have been some times, I'm not gonna say I've never pulled a punch, but because I think there's exceptions to everything that you do. But I think with the caveat that it shouldn't matter. I've tried to not just off somebody for no reason. You know what I mean? And I try to set things up within the rules to where that probably isn't going to happen.
I kind of feel like I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit because it is something as a GM that I struggle with when, it's a difficult road to walk because you want to be fair to everyone, but at the same time, on a meta level that some of the players that you play with are maybe, going to be a little difficult to deal with outside of the game later on.
With what I just said about going at everybody equally, a lot of the characters I make like I said, I like to make tragic hero kind of characters, that have like the strong possibility of death built into the character itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with a game master going harder on my characters in my gaming because I've designed my character that way. It's part of the story of that character.
And I would say that's
on
fair.
the other hand, am very annoyed when I feel like the GM is not being equal.
Mm-hmm.
In doling out punishment. So, you know what I mean? Like if you're
if some
pulling the
players are
punches for a
asking for
certain player, no, it's different if, you're making reckless decisions as a player. But if we're all involved in a game that is high stakes and the punishment seems to be more unilateral because of the players present at the table and not their characters, then that's very much a point where you're like, okay, that isn't, when it feels like someone else is getting preferable treatment.
What about along with that? What about when you have, let's say there's a party of 3 people, there are 2 fighters and 1 wizard. You're in the combat, and the fighters each take 10 damage, and the wizard only takes 2 because the fighters can take 10 and the wizard can't. Is that the same thing or no?
Oh, that one's tough. Because I'll be honest, I've done that.
The dice.
No, I'll be honest, I've done
how
that.
How the damage falls. Do you mean like when they decide, like your NPCs decide who they're attacking?
Yes.
Yeah. No,
Well,
okay, I've done.
But in most situations where I've seen, the people that are fighters will try and actively protect the player that is the wizard. But I feel like, you made a wizard,
so
it's inherent that your hit point total is not the same, and you are.
Is that the same argument that you were making before about GMing 2 different ways for different people, or no? Do you see it as particularly a player thing, or also character and class kind of a thing? So
I don't think your GM has anything to do with the wizard and how the player. You decide where your
attack
NPCs
those people.
go.
How I attack, if I have 15 goblins and 14 of them or 13 of them attack the wizard because he's a spellcaster in the artillery, and 2 of them go to tie up.
Right, but then you're
fighters.
giving your 13 goblins some kind of abnormal amount of intelligence that they know to attack the wizard and not the fighter.
No, he's got robes and he shoots fire.
Okay, so I think the basic.
Yeah, but the
basic,
other guy
hold
is
on.
big and he's cleaving goblins' heads off.
No, they should know that that's artillery.
Hold on.
But
No, goblins have an intelligence of like 8.
Oh my.
it's
Okay,
like a
hold on now.
-2 modifier.
Hold on.
all right, so I think we've come down that there's a lot of discussion to happen here, but essentially if it's game master versus character, as long as the expectations are set out the gate, that everybody should be on board and be okay with the potential and actuality of character death and significant character failure, right? The other situation is where it's player versus player. And when in the previous episode, what's kind of sparked this conversation was if you are going to have player versus player, one group has to win and one group has to lose, or you have to walk away from the game. So walking away from the game, I think, is not the right decision if it's a game you enjoy. If it's a game that sucks, then walk away from it by all means.
Yeah, the only acceptable reason to just walk away from a game without an ending is because nobody is having fun.
Yeah, it's terrible, which is okay because that happens. It's okay to
or
say
you're having fun, but your players aren't. That's an okay reason
Right.
too.
right. So how do you get players without? I mean, with the caveat of saying that we've already set expectations and blah 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 and that whole thing, and everybody knows. So how do you get them to be okay with winning and losing in a player versus player situation?
I think that's special. I mean, you have to set that
I
up.
feel like it's almost. I don't think you have to set that up. I feel
No?
like in most cases it's inherently different because it's almost never player versus player where I'm walking, minding my own business, and then all of a sudden the barbarian cleaves my head off from behind. There is a social dynamic that is happening within the game, and you can see it happening. There's tension building between these characters, and it is coming to a natural climax.
And it should be between characters, not players. We
Well,
should
yeah,
probably.
obviously.
Well, no, but I mean, it's
Right.
the obvious thing that I think needs to be said. If there's player tension, you need to stop and take care of that.
Well, yeah, that's a interpersonal issue, which I think is I mean,
It's
obviously,
a different discussion.
like we're all operating under this idea with the social contract that says we're here to play a game and have fun.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you're not okay with it, then that's fine. Then maybe this isn't the game for you. But how do you deal with?
I think it's more in this one about managing the tension that comes after that than it is about setting up, because it's setting itself up, and it's like I said, it's not usually a sudden, this player just whacked me. Like there was
right.
tension
What we're
growing
talking
ahead of
about,
time,
I
and
guess-
that conflict was building, and now it's reached its own conclusion,
Right.
and it's about you mediating and letting that happen.
This is also a situation where it's been set up through gameplay, where it's gone on and on and on.
Right, that's what I mean.
Not where it's a situation where I'm playing the rogue and I'm just being a crappy player and I'm going to pickpocket you until you catch me and then you stab me in the neck. That's not you.
That's
you,
not good storytelling.
You stab the treasure out of me.
I have become the
Yeah.
bag of
treasure.
treasure with
Right.
experience. Yeah.
So that's a different discussion entirely, because that's an interpersonal player issue, I think, in
Yeah.
that case.
Yeah.
This is a situation where for the story where it's been built up and clearly there's a conflict coming to a head. Like we've talked a couple times about the Space 1889 game where I had there's a big game hunter and some conflict with a mad scientist, and I should have pulled the trigger and gone that route, and I chose not to, and I don't really have a good reason why I didn't.
I don't know.
But and I know in that situation everybody at the table would have been okay, and I probably should have gone ahead and done it, and I don't have a good reason why I didn't.
Yeah.
But in that situation, that built up over time. So if you have players where you've got that tension building and you know someone, we're just going in circles.
So I guess then as a GM, is it your job to make sure that your players know if that is naturally occurring in the story, that it is okay to pull the trigger?
I mean, I feel like you should have that. I feel like you should have that meta moment. If I know that's coming, and if I don't know, like I know that the two players involved in that Space 1889 game, it's a tight table. You guys know each other. You know that the combat's not going to be arbitrary. It's going to be above board and fair. That you need to let that happen, but you may have to have that meta discussion with your players. Okay, I see this building. I see that the barbarian and the rogue have been going at this tension has been building. As players, where do you see this going with your characters?
Right. So then maybe diffuse it at a meta level and just say, this is clearly where this is going to go. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, so let's say we have that meta discussion and everyone says, no, I'm not okay with this. How do you navigate that?
Well, then as a game master to say, well, if we're not okay with having this conflict, that it just kind of built up organically in the thing, we're going to diffuse it through the story. Now, if the players don't want to do it.
Okay, so what about when that's
the
not
GM?
possible? So you have this game
How do you mean?
Okay, so you have a group of characters that start off with a common goal, and now maybe you have one character that's leaning towards the side of evil and 4 characters that are leaning towards the side of good. There is no reconciling that difference. You're not going to bring it together. Either one party is going to have to win, one party is going to have to lose, or the character that isn't fitting in with the party is going to have to sacrifice their character, become an NPC, and make somebody else that fits back in with the group. Sometimes your story is just not going to come cohesively together, no matter how much you want it to.
Unless you've set it up out the gate that the situation of the game is about people with different ethics and moralities or whatever, right, are able to work together because of whatever reason. Unless you set it up out the gate that way, you can manage that in that situation. But where it has just developed, where someone has gone on to, through whatever gameplay, to be a bad guy, for lack of a better term, that's it. Basically, you have to make a decision: whose story am I telling? Am I telling the story of this bad guy, and we'll focus on that, or am I telling the story of these good guys, or whatever the situation is, and that's the story I have to focus on. And if whichever one you choose, then either you have to split the game up and have either someone's got to make new characters, or you've just got to run two different games.
Well, and I don't think it's one of those things where we could what if this to death.
Oh yeah.
The point being that if you trust your players and your players trust you, they will come up with a solution, or they'll say, we want you to come up with a solution. And if they ask you to come up with a solution because they trust you and they think it would be cool, do that. And it's just, I think it's totally okay to have, and it's probably preferable to have that meta moment so that you can sit down and think, it's not the player, it's the character.
Right.
And let them hash it out.
So at that point, maybe stopping and saying, hey, there's this divide at the table. Are you guys okay with us bringing this to an epic, awesome conclusion?
Yeah. I mean, and that's so, yeah. And I think that's fine. And I think it's just something you should do. Just have the discussion. Communication in all things.
Communication.
Right. I know that's an easy thing to say because I've heard it on several other podcasts about different things like this situation, or how do you break up with a gaming table. But there's the reality is a lot of people don't do it.
Yeah.
So I guess like I have hard conversations all the time with people at work. It's just part of what we do. So I'm not scared to do that, I guess, but it's not that big
difficult.
of a, it's not that big. It's not as big of a deal as what you probably think, because whoever you're talking to about it, they probably are already halfway there anyway.
Yeah.
And you just got to break the ice and get the ball rolling.
Just be non-confrontational about it. Right? Like, you guys are screwing this up versus this is what I see coming. Is this what are you guys planning? And let them tell you, and and just kind of shepherd it. And I think you'll be fine.
You can have a brief moment where everyone kind of states their goals as far as what they would like to happen, and make some concessions about
in that
if
one.
You can't have this, then what would be your?
Well, the other thing is too is I don't think there's anything wrong with saying if people are so far apart, then that's okay. If I want to play Yahtzee and you want to play Catan, there's not a lot of middle ground there, and maybe I need to go to the Yahtzee party and you need to go to the Catan party, and that's okay. It's two totally separate games. So I also think you need to have the discussion, but it's okay to be like, we're just not interested in the same game.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So,
all
right. Well, I guess that kind of wandered around, and we'll see how this goes. But yeah, so. Again, I guess the lesson here is to set expectations with your players, which is something we keep coming back to.
Set expectations out the gate, communicate once problems arise, and I guess gives people a little bit of license in telling the story.
Creative license. It's a storytelling game.
Give your players some license to be involved in this story.
Definitely.
Player advocacy.
Oh, my gosh.
Right on.
I feel like we need a poster for that.
Like a little cat hanging from the tree. Advocate for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Not very catchy.
No.
Nobody is buying that poster.
Hang in there. Roll a 20.
Holding a D20. There you go.
Roll a 20 on my climb check. All right. Well, I guess that's where this is going to end.
Right on.
Thanks.
Right on.
Later. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.